Daniel Brinkley's near-death experience is one of the most complete ever reported. His resuscitation efforts stopped. His body was put aside, waiting to be transported to the morgue. He was dead a total of 28 minutes. After his life review, he was given a tour of that other world that most haven't seen.
We began to move. We began to move upward as though we were soaring. We kept moving higher and higher and higher, and I could see what appeared to me as lights emanating outward from the buildings. They were like great tabernacles, like great cathedrals, great buildings. When I think about it, I can only relate it like great cathedrals, like the cathedrals of Notre Dame and the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe. I'm not saying that they were churches, but I have seen such great, beautiful cathedrals built in honor of God that I think my mind would relate it that way. They were buildings that looked like they were glass brick. And as we moved into the building, I could feel a certain resistance. I didn't go through a doorway, I just passed into it. But as I also was passing into this building, I became aware that I had the ability to consume, understand, and know all information and all knowledge at the same time, from the very first molecule of a flower to the entire beauty of the plant. I was given insight into how to give love and share love again. It was pretty amazing to me, all this stuff. And as I've thought through it over the last 19 years, it's still quite amazing. But nonetheless, this happened. Then this being said, I had to return. What had been happening to me in the meantime, they had rushed me to the hospital. They had been working on me in the hospital. They got me restabilized, and I was breathing for a few minutes. Then they lost me for 11 more minutes. They had worked on me. They tired themselves out. They finally gave up. They covered me. They put a sheet over my head. They rolled me out into a room, waiting for me to be taken to the morgue. I all of a sudden appear in this hospital. I'm floating above everything, looking around. In this room, I saw a guy with a sheet over his head, a body. I knew it was me. All of a sudden, I'm back in my body. I'm on fire again. I'm burning. I'm going through all the sensations of not being able to put my conscious thoughts together because of the intense pain. My tongue is swollen completely the size of my mouth. I can't talk. There's nothing that I could do. So I'm looking up. What do? I realized they were coming to take me to the morgue. And all I knew to do was to blow the sheet.
Hey, this guy's still alive.
I spent the next 7 months learning to walk again, learning to feed myself again, falling against the walls, blacking out.
Daniel Brinkley was back among the living, at least for a while.
14 years after the first near-death experience, I had my second in the series of conversations with God.
Ever since Daniel's electrocution, he'd been living with a weak heart. The doctors told him that unless he had immediate open-heart surgery, he would die.
I knew what he was telling me was that the damage done by the lightning some 14 years ago, the hard work I had put in and pushing myself through these 14 years, and the aortic valve, which had developed staph infection, was giving away, and I was drowning in my own blood. So I was pretty happy because I knew there was no way I could live through that without having the surgery, and I wasn't having the surgery.
I had known Dan for some years, about 10 or 12 years at least. I got a call from a friend of his that he was dying.
I had resigned myself, talked to my family, got them together, put my business in order, and my father and my friend Franklin had thought of Raymond, Dr. Moody, and they called him.
I walked in, and I was quite startled to see Dan lying on the bed, unable to sit up. He was so weak. His color is just unimaginable. No one could get a real sense of this. It's impossible to believe. I've never seen anybody that color who lived to tell about it, let's say that. Dark gray purple.
And people say, don't you think that you would miss the things that were here? Not in the least bit. I wouldn't.
And I said, Dan, is there anything I can do for you?
And I said, yes, Raymond. I want a roast beef sandwich with lots of horseradish on it because I want to go out of here on a cholesterol rush. And we both laughed.
I said, please, Dan, sign it for me. And at this point, the first time I'd really seen him upset, he said, "All right, damn it, I'll sign it." Got mad, crashed his hand down on this table they had rolled across, signed it. They whisked him right away into the operating room.
I knew there was no way, even after promising Raymond, I knew there was no way I could live through them taking my heart out and cutting it. I think that one of the greatest things that I've learned in all of this is in my second near-death experience doing open heart surgery. I had the same panoramic life review. I saw the first 25 years through the same way as I saw it. But then, by the grace of God, I saw the next 14 years. Instead of being the people I'd hurt, humiliated, and caused such trouble and trauma in their life, I became the people who I had helped face death.
Those who have talked with God also tell of being admonished to use their life to learn, to devour knowledge. Most of those who have come back do just that. They look at life with a different perspective. They see beauty where they could see none before. They see the wonder in the world. They treat others with more compassion.
There's no question but that people who go through this kind of experience are transformed in a direction in which they place a lot more value and emphasis upon human relationships.
If we could only pretend to be colorblind, to accept our differences as wonderful, I just feel like this could be such a better world without fighting over our differences instead of appreciating our differences.
I would say that there is also a marked tendency for them to be people who live very much in the present and can really be there, not really distracted about what's going to happen tomorrow. Living in the presence and sense of humor, again, is something I've seen time and time again with them.
You know, if someone saw me right after my near-death experience or a few years later, they wouldn't look at me and say, "Grace is really different." They wouldn't notice an outside visible change, but I think people that know me well will realize the depth of change, the shift of perspective, the caring, the quality, the time, noticing things that I've never noticed before. It brings to mind the phrase, stopping to smell the roses, stopping to listen and to hear and to feel and appreciate all that's in this life. It changed me so deeply that it just was overwhelming at first. It seemed like I couldn't read enough. I couldn't listen enough. Again, I keep going back to people, people that I talked with. I could not get enough of them. I wanted to know more about them.
I know a woman who was 66 years of age, who had graduated some years before from high school. She had a cardiac arrest, was in the hospital for a time. 2 weeks after she got out of the hospital, she went down to the local junior college and signed up for courses.
So now, after 19 years, I've been a hospice volunteer for 17 years. I've been a nursing home volunteer for 12 years. How we affect things in our life is, you know, when you're a kid, how you skip stones or you throw a stone into a still pond, and then you watch the ripples. Every thought that you have, every action that you have has that same effect.
You know, in all the books I've written about near-death experience, one truth really stands out, and that is that religion is very much like working for the federal government, and being spiritual is very much like being an American. And the analogy here is that people who have near-death experiences frequently quit being religious and become far more spiritual.
All spiritual intuitions and feelings are equally valid, and that's why I've emphasized again and again that one person who has a spiritual feeling that causes him to have a knot in his stomach is the same thing as another person who just feels a whisper in the ear, "I love you."
And I felt my mother's presence coming to me. It was very eerie and kind of, I don't know, just kind of cold but eerie, but very spiritual, very loving. And I felt like her hand was taking and going like this to me, because that's what I was doing to her while she was in the coma.
"I love you." Thank you for taking care of me. I'm okay now.
Well, also the neat thing about the life review is that you can have it without being almost dead.
Absolutely.
I mean, you can have a life review on a daily basis, and you can make changes in your life just as if you had a near-death experience.
Apart from having a positive life transformation, individuals who have had near-death experiences find that they are different in other ways as well. For example, 25% of near-death experiences can't wear wristwatches. They stop. Give the wristwatch to someone who hasn't had an experience, it works. Put it back on the near-death experience's wrist, it stops. So far, there's no explanation. Some find that their minds are open to new knowledge in profound ways, miraculously given insights into mathematics or physics. Some have even been given psychic abilities, having a newfound clairvoyance or extrasensory perception.
How can it be that someone has a near-death experience and is so altered by that experience that suddenly they have dreams that come true? That sounds extraordinary. That sounds non-scientific. That sounds like nonsense, as many of my friends would say. And yet, the Southwest SIDS Alliance, the nation's largest research group on the effects of sudden infant death, have documented that 25% of parents who have infants die of SIDS have such a spiritual vision or intuition before the child dies. Now that we understand the function of our right temporal lobe, we understand how such a thing can be possible.
The idea that you could heal at a distance has been regarded as silly. Well, it's not as silly as it might sound. This has actually been put to the test.
And so, again, for the first time, we now have a coherent theory in which someone who's had a near-death experience has their right temporal lobe activated, and they're left with the residual ability to use that area of the brain to see future events. Why not? You know, it makes perfect sense from, interestingly enough, from a rational and scientific viewpoint, it makes sense.
We have empirical, solid scientific evidence that distant so-called psychic healing is not just fantasy anymore, but a concept that can be scientifically validated.
We see that there's a range of ways it presents to each person depending on their own spiritual outlooks and, let's face it, the development of their right temporal lobes. For some people who have well-developed temporal lobes, right temporal lobes, they see an angel in white. For people like myself or my friend who are right temporal lobe impaired, we need a kick in the stomach.
I think there's a point where we simply acknowledge that our visions and our experiences, as deep and transformative as they may be, at some point are simply beyond words. I'm touched by that feeling.
We're on the threshold of a new era of understanding. These near-death experiences are opening our eyes to a new reality. And these dramatic life transformations we see are striking evidence of the power of this reality. If we listen with an open mind, we may learn some valuable lessons.
The concept that people can see angels, that human beings have a soul that is separate from the body, those are considered to be naive beliefs from a simpler, more primitive time. Science is our God.
The question is it all over with the death of the brain and the body? When my brain and body die and rot, is there anything left over? Is there anything more? I believe that on the basis of modern scientific empirical findings, we can give a yes answer to that.
I think that two forces have shaped our current spiritual impoverishment as a society. The first one is our philosophical concepts that something must be proven in order to be rational. And that somehow then quickly got twisted into it's irrational to believe in something you can't prove.
Science changes funeral by funeral. And I'm convinced that that's one of the ways that we will achieve newer insights.
The second part of that comes from religion itself. Religion, feeling the assault of science, particularly in the late 1800s, then took a tact that all religious experience is direct revelation from God, and in doing so they felt that they could shelter themselves from any kind of skeptical inquiry. But as a result then, we became very fractured from a spiritual standpoint.
And so I think that modern medicine will be drugged, kicking and screaming, into acknowledging that there are new concepts of consciousness in which we say that the mind goes beyond the individual brain and the body.
If it is true, and I think that the scientific evidence points towards this being true, if it's true that we can access some sort of God that exists independent of our biological bodies, then clearly we're able to access a timeless place, because time is only a function of man as a biological being.
I've never met someone who had a powerful near-death experience who came back not believing in a God or accepting that there is a God.
You can't be in the light and be the same person ever again. You just can't.
If I had my choice, I would have stayed.
We have to start to now understand that all of these are part of one shared spiritual fabric. And it's interesting to me that science is leading the way. It's science that's allowing for people to have so many near-death experiences, which have led to these wonderful spiritual insights, in my case, learned from children. And I think it's this new scientific understanding of the brain, which is letting us know, hey, wait a minute, we are spiritual beings.
As Dr. Raymond Moody pointed out earlier, we may not be able to scientifically prove life after death from these experiences, but we can prove that these experiences have a profound and positive life transformational effect. Now, if we could only learn from this, all of us, if we could have a life transformation of our own without nearly dying, and practice compassion and love of our fellow man, it would be a better world, wouldn't it?